After an all-night session last Thursday, the Senate has adopted a $340 billion budget blueprint to try and implement the Trump administration's agenda. That agenda seems to include letting go more federal employees, which is starting to get some bipartisan pushback as more and more districts are affected. For more on all of this, WTOP Capitol Hill correspondent Mitchell Miller joins us. Mitchell, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So why don't we just kind of start out with that all-night session? Just give us the blueprints on the blueprint. What was the Senate trying to accomplish as they went through an all-nighter and got it through on Friday morning?
Yeah, this is, as you know, a tradition, especially with the budget reconciliation process. This was a nearly 9-hour voting marathon where Democrats were trying to do some political damage to the Republicans as they press forward with President Trump's agenda. Ultimately, after all was said and done, they did get that $340 billion blueprint that the Republicans want on the Senate side. But there were a lot of amendments from Democrats designed to, as I mentioned, damage the GOP brand, if you will, related specifically to DOGE and the cuts that have been spreading from agency to agency. Democrats offered a variety of amendments, including one that would have barred tax cuts for any person making over $1 billion a year. All of these amendments were designed essentially to draw attention to all these cuts and what Democrats say are big damages to federal agencies. Ultimately, as expected, they were all defeated. And when it was said and done, it was a victory for Senate Republicans. They passed at 52-48 with only Rand Paul, who often opposes these measures, voting against for the Republicans. So where does that leave us standing now? Well, now the Republicans have to figure out how they are going to mesh this with what the House wants to do. And President Trump has said he wants to do the so-called big, beautiful bill and get everything together, not just immigration, but the restoration of the Trump tax cuts from the first term. House Speaker Mike Johnson plans to move forward on that this week. We'll see if they get to a vote in connection with committees and whether it actually makes the push this week or it goes into next week, which some people also think will happen. But essentially, the Senate is now looking at its plan as a plan B in case the House Republicans cannot get the one big beautiful bill passed.
Yeah, it sounds like some more long nights may be ahead this time for the House. You mentioned the DOGE pushback there from Democrats, and it's been interesting to see that some of the more liberal supporters have been even suggesting that Democrats are not pushing back enough against DOGE and could be facing their own primary issues if they don't feel they're stepping up in their attempts to stop DOGE have been feckless. Like you mentioned, they just kind of nixed whatever additions they wanted to add to that bill. What are you hearing in those circles?
Well, I think a lot of Democrats acknowledge that they were caught on their heels when President Trump just started this flurry of executive orders. And I don't think that they anticipated that these cuts would happen as quickly as they have been. I mean, you had the latest being the IRS with close to 7,000 people, it looks like, will be out of jobs. And they just are going from agency to agency, as Federal News Network has been reporting along with everyone else. However, Democrats do seem to be getting some of their footing now. When they're asked what their message is, they first of all point, of course, to all of these cuts, and they are ramping up with getting the federal employees that are actually affected to talk about what is individually happening to them, how they lost their jobs, why they think they lost their jobs. And a lot of them, of course, have no idea why they lost their jobs because they received a terse email from DOGE, even though they may have had reviews that were positive or even maybe not even had a review. They're also Democrats are holding these rallies every day. I've been to one of them outside of the Capitol. Often they'll have federal union members with them, but there are also more organically planned rallies that are taking place across the country. And I really think that's where the Democrats are going to try to pick up some more political momentum. We saw even at a Republican town hall late last week, a freshman Republican, Rich McCormick, had a town hall meeting, and he was just blasted with questions from people in the audience who were concerned about how these cuts are being taken, saying that, as in the words of one person, that they seem to have a sloppy approach to how all this is going on. So, and this is in a district, by the way, that is very heavily Republican. So we'll be watching all of these political developments across the country, I think, because it is starting to filter to communities across the U.S.
talking here with WTOP Capitol Hill correspondent Mitchell Miller. Yeah, are Republican representatives making any sort of inclination that they are starting to get worried about whether or not they'll be able to continue to support these measures on a public basis at least, and at the meantime, try and maintain to their constituents that they're doing all they can to protect, jobs and the economy, since as you mentioned, and as we've espoused here at Federal News Network for years, the federal footprint goes far beyond D.C.
Right. I think we're starting to see a subtle change among congressional Republicans. Obviously, publicly, many are praising Musk and Doge, saying that there's a ton of government waste. It has to be cut out. But there is also a subtle pushback that's taking place, particularly among senators. Republican senators have been quietly going to the administration and saying, hey, look, this is hurting my constituents. Just one example is Kansas Senator Jerry Moran was raising objections over cuts and frozen funds related to the USAID flap, noting that farmers who were contracted to sell their crops, they have not been getting their money. You had Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski raising concerns about the fairness of how these people are being fired. And even longtime Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley, he told Radio Iowa last week that he thinks it's a tragedy for people that are getting laid off. But he also said Congress can't do anything except complain about it. Now, of course, Democrats would take another view and say you can do a lot more than complain about it. And of course, they're going into the courts. There are dozens of lawsuits and legal actions that are taking place right now. And I think ultimately that's where a lot of these issues may be resolved.
Yeah, one of the reasons why it seems Congress can't do anything about it is because they can't really go after the person who seems to be responsible for most of the layoffs, and that's Elon Musk, whose position in the White House is still a mystery to some, and some members of Congress are starting to ask, exactly what is his position within the administration. What can you tell me about that?
Right. One of those leading that effort is Virginia Congressman Jerry Connolly. He is, of course, the ranking Democrat on the House Oversight Committee. He launched an investigation into Elon Musk last week, firing off a letter asking to the administration, what exactly is Elon Musk's position? Now, publicly, of course, the president and Elon Musk himself has said that he is leading the Doge effort. But when you get into the legal battles, the White House attorneys are trying to protect him and are saying that he's not actually the administrator of Doge. So Democrats are trying to pin down the administration on this. President Trump has said you can call him whatever you want, but of course, that's not necessarily going to work with a judge. So Connolly and some other Democrats are really pushing hard now to try to find out more about the transparency and who is actually